so this, and I think everybody now is up to date on understanding that we communicate through hormones. So much that when I was little, my best friend, mother and father, they were famous psychiatrists, and they were explaining to me how friendship is a very chemically driven thing in relationships too. You know, who you fall in love with, who you become a friend with, there is a chemical component that is not well understood. It's underestimated. So why do you go with one person rather than with another? There may be just a chemical match in pheromones and other things and that's why I personally think often I like people immediately or not. For instance, I like you immediately if I didn't know you. And of course, there's always a chemical thing going on here, right? So there's some kind of match. So this is what I was thinking when you told me about interconnectivity. And the most basic way we understand interconnectivity among trees. So trees here are seen as individuals that are part of a tribe. We use this word now a lot in different terms, because of social media, but here it has a scientific meaning, right? So it's a population that's established, that's a link with the land in a particular area. I like to use that term to reflect the provenance, the fact that they're rooted in land, they're rooted in land. And then you'll see one of the concepts that will go, they're rooted in time as well. So the descendants of populations from the past have some traits that are absolutely associated with that population, but not just because of genetics, which is obvious, but also because of memory. So that's communication between different generations, and it's something that discovered not really, it's been discovered in the last 20 years, which for me is still recent. So that would be one of my main communication topics is how do trees communicate between one generation and the next. But the first one, and the one we've known the best, is how do trees communicate, with one another in the same generation. So when they're all standing in the same place. And a lot of that has to do with root connectivity. And so basically this is underground, right? So we don't see it, but trees, they tend to melt the root systems together. So when you see, a group of trees, each tree looks to us as a very clearly separate individual. But if you had X-ray vision, and you were able to look underground, you would see that all of these trees are actually, or a lot of these trees are interconnected because of the root systems. And this is it's actually not really a physical, it's not because they need to be interconnected to stand up. They can stand up on their own, but this interconnection has developed evolutionarily so that trees can actually exchange things with one another. So, and then I will bring it to the next level. So they're interconnected, and they share food and nutrients. So it's a wonderful social vision of a group of trees, but and that's also easily understandable. So basically, it's all trees survive as a group. I mean, they'll have to give up maybe some of the weakest ones. Nature is harsh. So there's no way, this shouldn't be seen as a way to bring everybody, to save everybody or protect everybody, but at least it's a way to share resources among individuals that are capable, okay? And so it's important to understand the difference between, the human or animal, but in the animal it's also similar. But also they share signals. So when a tree is in trouble, it may potentially produce chemicals that then are shared with other trees. And so, for instance, let's assume that I'm a group of trees, right? And the outermost trees is attacked by an insect, or by a fungus. Then you will produce chemicals that are shared through the roots, and it's going to warn the others that there is danger. And as a result of that signal, those trees will actually start protecting themselves, right? So they will they will start producing or activating those processes that will make them more resistant to infection. So through this root system, they share the good and they share the bad, but they share the bad in a good way, because this communication actually makes them stronger as a community, because the entire community will be readier, will be more, it will be ready for the enemy, right? Rather than being taken by surprise. So two things that they're sharing. While nutrients is fairly obvious, this other one of sharing the signal is relatively new data, but it's extremely important. Now, when we think of this communication through grafted roots, that's the term, grafted. So, it's fused, right? It's one body that is physically connected to the other one, as if, my toes became your toes, right? I mean, really, to use an image. There is a broader connectivity that happens below ground, and this is where things get really crazy. But this has been very well established, so it's not Matteo being crazy, okay? I'm crazy for other things, but this is true. And this connectivity below ground is broader because it actually goes not just, and I think this is something that Native people had understood way before European people had understood. It's a connectivity among multiple plant species in the same site. So it's not just all oak trees that are sharing, protecting themselves, but it's all the trees. It could be the oak trees with the manzanita trees, to give you an example, with the huckleberries. They actually are sharing information. So how are they sharing that information? Because we know that their root systems cannot graft, okay, only if you're really the same species. And so they're using fungi. So fungi produce, underground fungi, and these are mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi will produce very fine filaments below ground. And these filaments are essential because at the end, they do fuse with the roots. And they make, so to give you a number, they make the root system about 10 times larger than it is. So we know now, and we know this for about 40 years, that without this enlargement of the root system, that's done almost exclusively by the fungi, then the fungi fuse with the tips of the roots, trees would only be 5-6 foot tall, because they wouldn't have the ability to absorb a lot of the nutrients, micronutrients that they need to grow. And also the fungi make them more resistant to drought, which in California we know it's crucial. And so there's a lot of benefits, but all of this activity is done by the fungi. And why do the fungi do this? Because the fungi cannot absorb the energy of the sun. They cannot do photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis is at the base of our life. And so photosynthesis is done by the plants. So you see here we have we have energy, right? We have 4 systems. Energy that comes from the sky, which is the source of all life. And then we have nutrients underground, that is the other source of our life, because we need the nutrients for DNA. We need them, absolutely need them to produce DNA, otherwise we can't grow. Then we have the plants that can absorb the energy of the sun in abundance. In fact, they absorb more than they need of this sun energy. And then we have the fungi that can absorb more nutrients than the plant. And then the two together form a perfect balance, because the fungi give the plants those nutrients that they can't absorb in sufficient amounts. And the plants gives the results of photosynthesis, which are sugars, which, sugar is the result, they give them to the fungus. Now, the beauty is that these fungi that are all underground, they're called mycorrhizal fungi, they produce mushrooms, which is, mushrooms are eaten by animals, are eaten by man, the ones that are not poisonous, of course. Those mushrooms are the way these fungi spread. The small filaments that are underground will actually connect different species, like manzanita and oaks, for instance, and so forth, right? So here we have a connection that's not just among individuals of the same species. So the tribe now is not just oaks, but it's oaks and manzanitas and huckleberries that are growing in the same site. And I don't know that there is evidence of signaling of danger through mycorrhizae, but there is a great sharing of resources. So the nutrients and the carbohydrates are shared among plants using this underground interconnected system of microscopic filaments. So this is the second way, so very different level, right? Because it's still underground, but it's done by fungi, and fungi connect species, different trees that belong to the same species, but also that belong to different species. And this allows for a better sharing of resources. There's better protection against the enemy, actually. So there is, it's, even if it's not a signal, it establishes protection against drought. It establishes protection against root pathogens. So these fungi they try to protect themselves, but by doing so, they protect the plant as well, possibly without even knowing it. And so imagine here, so this, sun, nutrients, plants of different species, but because they grow in the same site, there is a benefit in them being interconnected. And then there's a funny story. There are some plants that are thieves. So what do they do? There are some plants that decided, well, you know what? The system underground works so well that I'm gonna it's just like the Matrix, right? The movie. I'm gonna plug in the Matrix, and I'm gonna suck in the sugars that are produced by the other plants, and I'm not gonna produce any sugar. So I'm pretending. So I'm plugging in the Matrix, pretending to do the same job that all the other plants do. But instead of give and take, I'm only taking. And basically, so there is the, there is, so these are the little thieves, right? But I guess eventually these thieves probably play a role in the plant community. They're biodiversity, they represent biodiversity. They're just, they were smart and they figured out how to get what they wanted without doing any effort, right? So that's part of the, that's part of the interconnectivity. So the third level of connectivity is truly through the air, okay? And this is really also very interesting. And this is absolutely, I would say last 10 years of research. So when trees are mostly a signaling of associated with the emergency, with threats, so trees that are under attack, they'll produce some of the same chemicals that were shared through the roots, but not every tree species is capable of connecting the roots the same way. Some are better than others. And so these tribes had to develop a different communication system. And so they developed a communication system using smell. And so trees produce substances that are volatile, so like our pheromones, they are in the air. And when a plant next to that plant smells, literally, the compound that's in the air knows that that tree is in trouble and will start protecting itself. And so it will be ready. So here, and this really, I don't know that there is any proof that it works in between species, although I'm probably will, I bet, although I haven't read any paper on that, I bet eventually we'll figure out that could also happen in between species, but definitely within the same species, they can communicate. These are called VOC, volatile organic VOCs, like Venice, Oscar, and Charlie. And these are volatile organic compounds. And these are the ones that tell neighboring trees, be ready, something is coming, okay? And apparently they play a huge role in creating resilience in these tribes. So these plants really respond very strongly when they smell these VOCs, and they become more resistant to insects, pathogens, but potentially even to drought and things like that. So it's a fantastic way to share something that is very important for for their survival. And so again, if you think of this, think of something that's produced by the leaves. So, when we were underground, we were thinking about grafting like this, right? Then we started talking about fungi. So you're not grafting, but there is something that's almost invisible that connects you two. And here you're standing up in the air, your leaves are, maybe sometimes quite distant, but you produce a chemical that we reach. And then once it reaches the other plant will respond and we'll have a different, so now, the fourth communication level is in between generations.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. I think artists could definitely do a lot of stuff with this intergenerational. And, when we think about progeny, children, so the children of these trees, right? It's impossible, but there is a dual relationship between the parent and the children. And the first relationship is obvious, is genetics, right? So you know that your daughter has 50% of your genes and 50% of the genes of the father, and that makes her, right? And each individual is different. But even if that's true, I think often we actually overstate the difference, because really mostly she will be very similar to you and to the father, even if different, because the combination makes her different, but individual genes will be the same. So through generations that changes, because every time there is a new combination. But even if you look after multiple generation, of course the genes will be shared. That's the genetic ancestral component, which makes each tribe different because it starts from different parents, and it's fairly obvious. What people didn't know is, and this applies only to mothers. So this is why I think artists could go crazy with this. So genetics is father and mother, right? Um, of course, there's a different way for plants to grow, right? So when a redwood dies, it sprouts. So sometimes the children are absolutely identical to the parents. So that's a different way, but that's not what I'm investigating here. Yeah, I really want to look at generational communication. So there is a way mothers can communicate with their progeny, and it's through memory of what happens to the cell of the mother. So a mother that's under attack will leave and not the father, only the mother, will leave a chemical signal in their cytoplasm, okay? And the chemical signal is a little bit the history of what happened to me. I was attacked by insects, I was attacked by fungi, and this is what I did. And what happens, the children will benefit from that signal, and they will actually be more resistant to the insect that attacked the mother, maybe 50 years before, way before the new plants came out, right? So this is it's a memory, it's called memory. It's memory at the cytoplasmic, so at the cell level. And I find it one of the most beautiful things ever. So this is the intergenerational communication that trees have. That's beyond the genes, which at this point I'm giving genetics as a given, but but it's still, the genetics is beautiful because it roots you to a certain place, because all of the trees come from original trees that got established there. Even if this was thousands and thousands of years ago, we still have the same genes. But here I'm talking of a shorter term intergenerational communication, where the mother basically leaves a message in a bottle for the child. Be ready, because this happened to me. And that child will be able to, so basically, again, you have a tree that is attacked, and if that's the mother, the children will be better at resisting the same attack in the future, because their mother already went through the effort of doing that and figuring out what worked and what didn't work, right? Because there's a lot of triage. So as a plant, you try a lot of things and one works, and that's the one that's going to be shared with your children. It's the one that actually was successful. And so it's a wonderful intergenerational communication.
It's absolutely
right?
incredible.
Yeah, and that's why when you told me about it, I said, oh my God. So this is everything that I thought of was really communication among trees. I didn't go to the plants versus and humans communications. That's not really what I know. So I wouldn't know, to tell you much about that. Um, I think I can talk at the end. I will talk a little bit about that. Now, so I talked about different modes of communication that plants have, even in between generations. Now, sometimes this, there's a cost associated with everything, and so if you try to communicate too much to your children, you overwhelm them because they'll be worried about, they'll be worried about everything, right? They become worry wards, right? That's what sometimes I'm a worry wart. I worry
Parenting
about
lesson.
yeah, those parents that are too protective, that turns out to be not very good for the child, right? Because the child, so the same thing applies to so sometimes it's not beneficial for the mother to communicate too much to the child because then the child spends too much time worrying rather than doing what it's supposed to be doing, living life. Same thing that applies to humans applies to plants. So that probably in the end doesn't happen very often. But the other thing that happens, unfortunately, remember I told you about the thieves. So the thieves use, so they're not, so that's a negative maybe, but more negative is the ability, once a root disease is able to really attack one individual, it can use the roots, the interconnected roots to give contagion to another individual. And so basically what is a plus, all of a sudden, if the defense of one individual breaches, and this is beautiful because it's beautiful and sad, but it's beautiful because there is a social component. We are trying to defend our tribe. If one tree goes, more trees will go because they're interconnected in the root systems. And so this is also beautiful, I think, from a conceptual perspective, this idea that if one falls, many more will fall as well because we are interconnected. So what was a plus becomes a minus because I have these tunnels, to bring you food and arms. But if the tunnels get occupied by the enemy, then they can use the tunnels to actually reach the second castle and the third castle and the fourth castle. And so this is kind of the other side of the coin of sharing, and the thieves could also be the other side of the coin, right? So we're sharing now. When a lot of native people, but also Europeans that come from areas that with a rich natural heritage, more than agricultural. So I put them really in the same. I come from one such heritages, and we're very aware of a lot of things that concern the natural world. Even if we interpret differently because we have different cultures, I think in the end the concepts are very similar. And so one is the concept of diversity. So why do we treasure diversity? And I will say a couple of things that are very interesting. And so and there is evidence that when these root pathogens arrive, but even when insects arrive, if normally these root pathogens will be very aggressive on a tree species. Okay, so for instance, let's say pines, right? Okay, I'm talking pines. So if your forest is all made out of pines, these organisms, whether they're microbes or insects, they will spread through it as wildfire if the environment is favorable, right? If I have pines and oaks, every time I find an oak, I can't spread as well because I don't know oak. Oak is not my host, right? And so as a result of that, the more diversity you have in your forest, the more resilient that forest is. And this applies to, so it applies to this biological resilience, and it also works if you think of this as social distancing. So social distancing, which now everybody understands, I've been teaching it for like 30 years and my students never understand it. So now if you don't get that question right, I'm going to be very upset. So if I have an infectious disease, right, and I'm an oak tree, and the next oak tree is 30 yards away, the chances of me, which could be because in between I have pines, right? So my disease from oak doesn't go to a pine, it goes to the other oak. So me being distant from another oak makes that disease more difficult to be transferred because I'm socially distanced. If two trees are very close to each other, then it's easier for disease to be communicated from one individual to the next. Now, this concept also explains why, because of fire exclusion, remember the native people really used fire all the time, right? And fire was extremely beneficial because uh, the more fire tolerant species were particularly beneficial to native people. I mean, all plants are beneficial, but by using fire, they would, for instance, the percentage of oaks would increase, and oaks were beneficial because of the acorns that were used and so forth. And so, and then by using fire, the nutrients would be given back to the land, but also distancing became better. And when distancing is better, you have less, the fires are less intense. They're less intense, which is beneficial because nobody really wants the super hot fires we're having now. They're not natural. They're an abomination. They're just due to what we have done to the land. So this issue and then when you have multiple species, you have a fire tolerant and fire intolerant species, and so together a fire will not be able to spread very rapidly because some species will just stand there and stop the fire without burning, right? But if you have a lot of species that ignite very easily, then the fire. So there's a lot of reasons why biodiversity increases resilience at many different levels. And so that is also something else that justifies having that where possible, having diverse communities is a benefit. Also, each tree uses different resources, right? And so if you have different species, I'm not stealing from my neighbor necessarily because my neighbor uses different things. I eat A and my neighbor eats B. And so I can eat A without taking away from my neighbor. And so that maximizes the potential that a tree has. So this is just expanding the concept to why biodiversity is important, but also biodiversity will reduce this underground connection. So even if connectivity exists among different species, it's reduced compared to the connectivity that you have within the same species. And that connectivity, as I was saying, is good and bad. Good because it allows you to share resources and to give alert signals, but it's bad because once the enemy comes in, then the enemy can move more rapidly, both below ground and above ground. And so in many respects, there's a lot of similarities between human societies and plant society. So these are the concepts that excite me about connectivity, but I can only talk about connectivity among trees. When we talk about, if this was about connectivity between trees and humans, that's a different story altogether. The only thing I can tell you is that there are quite a few papers out there that show that people that live with trees live longer and happier lives. So communities that live in urban areas that are green have less problems, less health issues, and are expected to live longer than communities that live in areas without trees. And these were nice studies that were done, taking into consideration the different background of people. So they adjusted for that, and still the effect was significant. So it's not because one was a European community, one was a community of African Americans, one was a Latino community. Actually, when you adjust for those differences, the presence and the absence of trees, it really makes an additional impact on how happy you will be and how long you're expected to live and how good your life will be. So I know that that's been shown in multiple papers, and that's all I know about tree to tree to humans communication. But I think that tree to tree communication is key to understanding the forest as a whole.
This is incredible. Thank you.
Cool, huh?
Again,
I
you,
think it's fun. I think it's super cool.
I can't wait till you're back in September and to share what we've come up with and just keep digging at this. And thank you for letting me record this because I want to share.
Well, I hope you can share this with the people that are involved so we can move ahead. Feel free to share this.
Thank you.
And remember, I mean, I explained this in simple terms.
That's fine.
So,
You explained it in a way that makes it very understandable and inspiring. You're
well,
going to have young
it's the way I put
scientists
it.
on your hands.
It's the way I understand it.
Yeah.
Because when I go into I need to bring it down to this level for it to make sense in my little brain now. And so, yeah, but there may be, it's not to be taken like people read the Bible and they take every word literally.
No, but it's really exciting and it is new research.
It is a lot of this stuff is new. So I started from things that were better known, but I would say all of this is fairly, I would say probably 50, 60 years for the oldest stuff to maybe 10 years for the newest stuff. So we're talking really new understanding. I would say that the root grafting is maybe some of the older things that people knew.
Yeah.
But even that, I would say the really an understanding of the importance of root grafts comes from maybe 60, maximum 70 years ago. And the volatile compounds are something of the last 10, 15 years. And the memory of the mother to the children, that's something from the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So,
Which
yeah.
is just incredible. I imagine you're connecting this to some of the oak research you've been doing and the sudden oak death.
Well, we actually, I have moved a little bit away from that now recently. So I'm now working on two different things. I was working on introduction of exotic pathogen, mostly Phytophthora, but just through restoration projects. So this is a really hot topic, and it's really terrible in the peninsula and where you are, in Santa Clara and Santa Clara County. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue throughout the state. California may be more than other states. Why? Because California has a very active restoration is something that's in everybody's mind. So you want to do as much restoration as possible. And in fact, open space, the SFPUC, these large ownerships or management, they have to do a certain amount of their income as to be dedicated to restoration. And we just found out, and we just published the paper that actually proves it this year. We have known about this for about 6-7 years. But this year I was able to publish a paper where I've shown scientifically that when people do restorations, unfortunately, without knowing, they've used tainted seedlings. So they planted seedling with the root Phytophthora in them. And these Phytophthora are exotic. These are not aerial like sudden oak death. These are root Phytophthora. And so when they planted the seedling, rather than, let's say that you're planting monkey sticky flower or toyon or coffee berry, what happens, the coffee berry dies because it's already infected when you plant it. And then the microbe spreads and starts killing plants nearby. So these restoration projects have the opposite effect of what they were intended. And on top of that, they introduce these exotic pathogens that, like sudden oak death, once you have it, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can do something, but you cannot get rid of it. And so we have shown this, and now this year, I forgot when the paper came out, we actually were able to run the first experiment showing that for real, it was restorations doing that.
Wow.
And so that's a big topic. But then now, talking about communication, I am studying Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
You don't say.
I do say, because I discovered, have you heard that there's a lot of trees dying in the Bay Area? A lot of eucalyptus, acacia, large scale, right? And so I found out that because of climate change, these fungi that are inside the plant. And that's why, so each tree has this fungi inside of it already. And what happens because of climate change, these fungi become, from being beneficial, they become killers. So you have something that's useful to you, but then because the climate has changed, that microbe becomes a killer and kills you. And what makes things worse is the alternation of very heavy rainfall and drought. So because of 2017, which was the wettest year in California's history, we had a wave of infection of these beneficial organisms. And then with the mega drought, they all turn into killers, and they're killing probably millions of plants around California. And these were always microbes that we knew they could do that, but we thought they would only do that occasionally. So we never see them do that in such large scale because we never had climate change before, right? And so now, rather than normally was a few trees that were maybe in the worst spot, they would experience, now all trees are in the worst spot because trees cannot move and the climate is changing. So this is also an interesting topic about, it is communication in some way because these trees are sharing a good fungus with water. When there is water, with the water, I also give you something beneficial. But then all of a sudden, there's a switch that gets turned on and turned off, and all of these beneficial organisms become detrimental. So this is an interaction between plants sharing something good through rain, because rain is key, a little bit like sudden or death, right? But in this case, it's really beneficial. And then there is a driver from the outside, which is climate change. And then all of this good, it's like a little bit like an alien movie, right? All of a sudden, this good thing that's inside of you becomes really dangerous and kills you. So, and I think this is unfortunately a natural way for nature to get rid of plants that don't belong anymore. So I think that with climate change, it's almost, in some way, it's a good thing because it's changing the way the landscape looks. But of course, we're going to put the same plants there again because we want to see the same plants because we're used to them. Yeah. But I think we need to accept that maybe where these plants are killed by this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde fungi, that we need to plant something else because nature is telling us the time has come for these plants to move north or to move up the hill, And here we should let somebody else come in that's better adapted to the new climate.
So much. I appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you.
Share the exhibition with everybody as well. And if you,
okay, good.
I will link it to all of we'll have sort of an archive that we place online. And if I could have this talk and your exhibition both there, a link to it, that would be great.
I think that this is a good way to get things moving, even if I'm not immediately available. And maybe next time we can have a roundtable that maybe covers some of these points, maybe how people perceive this talk of mine. What did they think when I was talking? Did it make sense? And some people may strongly disagree. I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm just telling what. It's science. I think everything I said is sound, but there's always caveats and there's always different ways of looking at things. So,
well, and it's going to inspire us with all of the other conversations we're going to have and all of the work in the trees. I'll be sending you photographs so you can see us and then send you some video documentation.
I mean, I think from a dad's perspective, the fact of this communication that happens at the ground level, below ground, at the ground, and then up,
up in the air.
This is an acrobatic, I understand from looking at the pictures. You could have this interesting, sharing information at these different levels, and then the different outcomes. What happens to these individuals of this tribe. That it's like a day, a day in the life of a tribe of trees, and what happens to them, and how do they survive, and how communication is so crucial for their survival, and unfortunately sometimes also to their demise.
Yeah, and I love the piece about this generational memory and exchange between generations. which is
Between mothers,
for
between mother,
me
only mothers.
really
That's what
less of a familiar concept, but I know for the Ohlone and many Native people, this sort of thinking 7 generations back and forward and how you're living sandwiched between these generations and everything you're doing is for the 7 before you and all the knowledge you're taking is from the 7.
it's ever
It's
true.
incredible.
I think it actually, there is some scientific basis to that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really, really incredible. So, Matteo, I appreciate you as always. We're going to get in this forest.
fantastic, fantastic. And here I am, willing to help as much as I can. Thank you,
Thank you
Kelly.
so much. I will
Love
talk
you.
to you soon.
Bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.